I'm Royce, a 34-year-old guy who's been grinding in digital marketing consulting for the past 10 years. I started with absolutely nothing, literally sleeping on my parents' couch in their cramped Chicago apartment, surviving on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and cold calling businesses in a wrinkled suit I bought from Goodwill for $12. That first year was brutal. I made $18,000 total, barely enough to cover gas money for my beat-up Honda Civic. But I kept pushing. By year 3, I had my own studio apartment on the north side and a steady stream of clients who actually paid their invoices on time. Now, I run a solid 6-figure consulting business with no partners, no boss breathing down my neck, and most importantly, no debt. With that financial stability locked down, I started investing in real estate. I bought my first property 3 years ago, a modest 2-bedroom ranch in Naperville that I paid off aggressively. Then I found this gem on Oak Street, a fixer-upper with great bones in an up-and-coming neighborhood. I renovated it myself on weekends, rented it out to a young couple, and now it brings in $2,200 a month in passive income while the property value steadily climbs. That's where my life was when I met Veronica at a networking mixer in downtown Chicago. She was 31, worked in social media marketing, and had this magnetic confidence that drew people in. Smart, independent, with her own career and apartment in Lincoln Park. We clicked immediately over craft cocktails and shared horror stories about difficult clients. 6 months in, she was practically living at my place. After 2.5 years together, I proposed during a weekend trip to Door County. She said yes with tears in her eyes, and we set the wedding date for 8 months out, plenty of time to plan everything properly without the stress of rushing. Looking back now, that engagement period was when the first red flags started waving. But at the time, I was convinced I'd found my person. Someone who understood my work ethic, appreciated what I'd built from nothing, and wanted to be my partner rather than my dependent. God, was I wrong about that last part? The trouble started when Veronica suggested we open a joint account specifically for wedding expenses. On paper, it made perfect sense. We'd both contribute money, pay all the vendors from one place, and keep everything organized and transparent. I thought it showed financial maturity, especially since Veronica had a background in marketing and was naturally detail-oriented. I transferred $22,000 to start, generous but not enough to break my budget. Veronica added $7,500 from her savings. The plan was straightforward. Venue deposits, catering, photography, flowers, all the standard wedding costs would come from this account. We'd each add more money as needed, but that initial $29,500 should cover the major expenses. Here's where things got interesting. Veronica took control of the debit card and volunteered to handle most vendor payments since she was doing the heavy lifting on wedding planning. Fair enough. I hate dealing with wedding vendors anyway. I'd rather focus on growing my business and let her manage those details. The first month looked completely normal on the bank statements. $3,200 to the Hilton for our venue deposit, $950 to our photographer Sarah, $600 to Blooming Designs for flowers. All standard stuff we discussed and agreed on beforehand. I barely paid attention to the smaller charges because I trusted her judgment completely. But then I started noticing weird patterns when I reviewed our monthly statement. There was a $385 charge to some boutique called Glamour and Grace that I didn't recognize. When I asked Veronica about it over dinner at our favorite Italian place, she casually mentioned it was for wedding shoes. Brides need special shoes, babe. You wouldn't understand. Okay, fine. Wedding shoes are apparently expensive. Who knew? Next came a $320 charge to Serenity Spa and Nails. I figured this was normal bridal preparation stuff, but it seemed steep for what I assumed was a basic manicure. Most of my married buddies had warned me to just write the checks and stay out of the planning details. Happy wife, happy life, they all said. So I kept my mouth shut. The real wake-up call came when I spotted a $1,450 charge to some high-end spa resort in Wisconsin Dells. That seemed like way too much for whatever brides do at spas, so I brought it up while we were having burgers at our local sports bar. Oh, that's for my bachelorette party planning, Veronica said, not even looking up from her phone where she was scrolling through Instagram. Me and the girls are doing a weekend spa retreat instead of the typical Vegas thing. Much more sophisticated and meaningful. I nearly choked on my beer. You're paying for your entire bachelorette party out of our wedding account? It's wedding related, she said with this defensive edge creeping into her voice. The bachelorette party is part of the whole wedding experience. That logic made zero sense to me. A bachelorette party is a personal celebration expense, not a wedding cost that both of us should be funding equally. But I didn't want to be the controlling fiancé who micromanaged every purchase. The breaking point came when I discovered multiple hotel charges totaling $2,850, all for the same weekend, our actual wedding weekend. When I added them up and asked about it during our Sunday morning coffee routine, Veronica gave me this look like I was being incredibly petty. "Those are for my family's hotel rooms," she explained matter-of-factly. "My parents, my sister Ashley, my Aunt Patricia, and my cousin Jennifer. They're all flying in from Phoenix for the wedding." "Veronica, we specifically discussed this. We agreed that families would handle their own travel and hotel costs." "That was before I really thought about it," she said, getting more animated. "My family isn't as financially comfortable as yours. They shouldn't have to stress about expensive Chicago hotel rates during our special weekend. Yeah, my parents could afford their own hotel room because they're retired teachers who made smart financial decisions their whole lives and live within their means. Veronica's parents couldn't afford it because they lease a brand new Cadillac Escalade they can't really pay for and take elaborate cruise vacations on credit cards every year. But apparently pointing that out would make me the villain in this story. "We only have one wedding in our lifetime, Royce," Veronica said when I pushed back on the hotel expenses. "Why not do it right? Why not make sure everyone we love can celebrate with us without worrying about money?" That phrase, "we only have one wedding in our lifetime," became her justification for absolutely everything. Upgraded floral arrangements because we only have one wedding. Professional hair and makeup for all 5 bridesmaids because we only have one wedding. A videographer in addition to our photographer because we only have one wedding. Meanwhile, Veronica hadn't contributed another penny to the joint account since that initial $7,500. She was spending money like we were millionaires while contributing nothing extra to cover the mounting overages. I was essentially funding her entire family's wedding vacation while she acted like these were mutual decisions we'd made together. Our joint account balance kept dropping fast. $26,000, $23,000, $19,500. At this rate, we'd burned through everything before we even paid the major vendors like catering and the band. But every time I brought up the spending patterns, Veronica would get emotional and say I was stressing her out during an already overwhelming time. I should have shut it down right then and there. Should have had a serious come-to-Jesus conversation about budgets and boundaries. But I kept telling myself it was just wedding stress, that things would return to normal after we were married. I figured I could absorb the extra costs if it meant avoiding major conflict during an already tense planning period. Biggest mistake I could have made because what I thought was just wedding overspending was actually Veronica showing me exactly who she really was when she thought she had me locked down. And the real test was still coming. About 6 weeks before our wedding date, Veronica and I were having one of our regular Sunday morning planning sessions. We developed this routine where we'd sit at my kitchen island with coffee and wedding binders, going through vendor confirmations and guest RSVP updates. Pretty standard couple stuff, even though these sessions lately turned into arguments about her latest expensive ideas. This particular Sunday felt different though. We just finished updating our final head count, 156 people, which was about 25 more than originally planned because Veronica kept adding distant relatives and work acquaintances. I was internally calculating what that would do to our already strained catering budget when she brought up something completely out of left field. "I've been thinking about wedding gifts," she said casually, not looking up from her phone where she was browsing some wedding planning app. "Not the registry stuff from guests, but what we give to our families as a thank you." I was still focused on the guest list mathematics, trying to figure out if we needed additional table rentals. "What do you mean like thank you gifts for our parents?" "Sort of, but more significant than that." She put down her phone and got this look on her face like she was about to present a brilliant business proposal. "Your parents are pretty comfortable financially," Veronica continued, leaning forward across my granite countertop. "They don't really need anything material from us, right?" "True enough. My parents are both retired educators with decent pensions, own their modest suburban home outright, and take nice vacations to places like Branson and Gatlinburg every year. They're not wealthy by any means, but they're secure and content with what they have. But my parents are in a completely different situation," Veronica went on, her voice getting more animated. "They've been stuck in that same rental apartment in Phoenix for like 16 years. They've never been able to save enough for a down payment because rent keeps increasing and they had some credit issues after my dad's accident a few years back." This was all true. Veronica's parents lived in a decent 2-bedroom apartment complex, but they were essentially throwing away $1,600 a month in rent with nothing to build equity on. Her dad worked as a parts manager at a Ford dealership, and her mom did part-time bookkeeping for a dental practice. Nice people, but they definitely made some questionable financial choices, Always had car payments, took expensive vacations they couldn't afford, that sort of thing. Okay, I said, still not seeing where this conversation was heading. What exactly are you thinking? Veronica's eyes lit up like she'd been waiting for this moment. What if we gave them something that would actually transform their lives? Something meaningful that shows how much we appreciate everything they've done for us over the years. The way she was building up to this was making me nervous. Like, what kind of transformational gift was she imagining? The house on Oak Street. I literally stopped breathing for a second. Just stared at her to see if she was joking or testing some kind of reaction. She wasn't. She was completely serious. You want me to give your parents my rental property? Think about it logically, she said, like she was presenting a perfectly reasonable business proposal. You don't even live there. It's just sitting there generating rental income while my parents struggle with rising rent costs and apartment living. This would solve their housing problem permanently. I put down my coffee mug and really looked at her. Veronica, that house is worth almost $250,000. You're asking me to give your parents a $250,000 wedding gift. She waved her hand dismissively like I was being dramatic about pocket change. It's not like you'd be losing $250,000. You'd just be transferring an asset to family. The house would still exist in our family circle. It would just belong to people who actually need stable housing instead of just generating profit. The casual way she said it was almost insulting, like I was being petty for thinking about the financial implications of giving away a house I'd worked years to afford. I bought that property as an investment, I said, trying to keep my voice level. It generates $2,200 a month in rental income. That's over $26,000 a year in passive income. Why would I just give that away? Because we're about to be married, she said, her tone getting sharper and more insistent. Because marriage means sometimes putting your spouse's family's needs before your own financial interests. Because it would mean everything to me to start our life together with this kind of generous gesture. And what would you be giving my family in return? What's the equivalent gesture from your side? She looked at me like that was the stupidest question anyone had ever asked. Your parents don't need anything material. They're already comfortable and secure. That's not the point, Veronica. The point is you're asking me to make a massive financial sacrifice while offering nothing comparable yourself. I'm offering my love and commitment, she said with this dramatic flair. I'm offering to build a life with you. Isn't that worth more than some rental income? The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. She was trying to make this about our relationship and my commitment to her when it was clearly about money and her sense of entitlement to my assets. Veronica, I'm not giving your parents my house. The shift in her expression was immediate and dramatic, like a switch had been flipped. The sweet, reasonable version of Veronica vanished completely, replaced by someone much harder and colder. That entitled edge crept into her voice as she started talking about my second property, like it was just sitting there waiting to be gifted away. She didn't even try to sugarcoat her demands anymore. In her mind, owning two properties meant one was automatically up for grabs, specifically for her parents' benefit. There was no recognition of how I'd gotten to this point, no appreciation for the years I'd spent grinding while she was still figuring out her career path. Just the assumption that what I had built should now be redistributed to prove my love and loyalty. When I stood firm on my decision, her bitterness bubbled up fast. Suddenly, I was the villain in her story. Selfish, ungrateful, heartless. She acted like I was turning my back on the very people who had supposedly supported our relationship. She twisted the entire situation into some warped morality test where declining to hand over a $250,000 property wasn't about reasonable boundaries, it was a personal insult to her family. Then came the manipulation tactics. She stopped pacing around my kitchen, fixed me with a look that was part disappointment and part threat, and said something that made my stomach drop. If you don't sign over the house to my parents, the wedding's off. She threw our entire relationship on the table like a bargaining chip. Like if I didn't go along with this insane plan, it meant I didn't truly love her. In that moment, I realized exactly who I was engaged to marry. Someone who measured love by how much I was willing to sacrifice, not by mutual respect or partnership. To her, giving away something I'd worked years to afford wasn't unreasonable, it was expected proof of my commitment. Anything less meant I was failing her as a future husband. The silence that followed felt heavy and loaded. We just stared at each other across my kitchen island, and I could see her processing the fact that I wasn't going to cave to her demands like she'd obviously expected. Fine, she said finally, grabbing her purse and keys from the counter. I'm going to stay with my parents until you get your priorities straight about what marriage actually means. She headed for my front door, then turned back with this dramatic pause that felt rehearsed. Call me when you're ready to be a real partner instead of a selfish property hoarder. The door slammed behind her, and suddenly my house was completely quiet again. I sat there for several minutes trying to process what had just happened. My fiancée had just demanded I give her parents a $250,000 house as a wedding gift, then stormed out when I refused. The craziest part? She seemed genuinely shocked that I'd said no, like she'd expected me to just hand over my property without question. Like it was a reasonable request instead of completely insane. That's when I started wondering what other expectations she had about my assets after we got married. And that's when I decided I needed to do some serious investigating. Veronica stayed at her parents' place for 3 days without calling or texting once. Honestly, it was the most peaceful my house had felt in months. No wedding planning stress, no arguments about vendor costs, no dramatic sighs when I had to take important work calls. Just me, my normal routine, and some actual quiet time to think clearly about everything. Wednesday morning around 10 a.m. my phone finally rang. Veronica's name popped up on the screen, and I almost sent it to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" she asked, like she was calling to confirm dinner reservations instead of asking about a $250,000 house. Her tone was different though, less angry than when she'd stormed out, more like she was talking to a client she was trying to close a business deal with. "Yeah, I've thought about it," I said. The answer's still no. There was this long pause and I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head. She probably spent the last 3 days with her parents, getting them all excited about the possibility of free home ownership, maybe even planning where they'd put their furniture. "Look," I said, trying to keep things civil, "I understand you want to help your parents. After we're married, we can discuss ways to assist them financially. Maybe help with a down payment on their own place or—" "No," she cut me off sharply. "That's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for this specific house, for this specific reason, as this specific gesture. Either you understand why this matters to me or you don't." The way she said it made my stomach drop. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was an ultimatum disguised as a conversation. "And if I don't?" I asked. Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was ice cold. "Then maybe we need to postpone the wedding until you're ready to be the partner I need you to be." There it was. The threat I'd been waiting for. Give me your house or lose your fiancé. Pretty clear choice, right? "Let me think about it," I told her. "This is a major decision. Give me a few days to process everything." Her tone immediately brightened, like a salesperson who just got a customer to agree to think about the extended warranty. "Really? Oh, Royce, I knew you'd understand once you really thought it through. This is going to be so incredible. My parents are going to be so grateful, and I'm going to be so proud to have a husband who cares about family the way you do." The confidence in her voice was telling. She wasn't hoping I'd agree, she was expecting it, like the outcome was already decided and I just needed time to accept the inevitable. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen for a while trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. My fiancée had just threatened to postpone our wedding unless I gave her parents my house. That's when I decided to make some phone calls of my own. First call was to my buddy Cameron, who's been practicing law for about 7 years now. We played college football together at Northwestern, and he's always been straight with me about legal stuff. I explained the whole situation. Fiancée demanding I gift her parents my rental property, threatening to postpone the wedding if I refused. "Dude," he said immediately, "run? Like pack your stuff and run right now. Is that serious, Royce? This isn't normal relationship behavior. This is gold digger level manipulation. She's literally holding your wedding hostage to extort property from you." We talked for about an hour about my options and what I needed to protect myself legally. Cameron explained how marriage affects property ownership in Illinois, what community property laws look like, and how Veronica might try to claim rights to my assets after we were married. "Here's what you need to do immediately," he said. "Document everything. Every conversation, every text message, every demand she makes. If this relationship goes south, you'll need evidence that she was trying to manipulate you into transferring assets." That afternoon, I called my financial advisor and my accountant, explained that I was having serious second thoughts about getting married and wanted to make sure all my assets were properly protected. Both of them said the same thing Cameron had. Document everything and don't transfer any property before the wedding. My accountant was especially direct about it. "Royce, you've worked too hard building wealth to hand it over to someone who sees you as a personal ATM. This woman is showing you exactly who she is. Believe her." But I wasn't done investigating yet. Something about Veronica's confidence was really bothering me. She seemed way too certain that I'd eventually cave to her demands, like she had information or leverage I didn't know about. First thing I did was check the security system on my rental property. I'd installed cameras on the front and back doors, plus one overlooking the driveway, mainly to keep an eye on the tenants and make sure they weren't throwing unauthorized parties or damaging the property. I pulled up the footage from the past week, just routine checking, and that's when I saw something that made my blood absolutely boil. Tuesday afternoon, the day after Veronica had stormed out of my house, there was her silver Honda Accord pulling into the driveway of my rental property. And she wasn't alone. Two older people got out with her, and I immediately recognized them as her parents from Phoenix. I watched the footage of the three of them walking around my property for almost an hour and a half. Veronica had keys somehow, probably made copies when we'd done a walkthrough together months earlier so she could see the investment side of my portfolio. Her mom was taking pictures with her phone while her dad was actually measuring rooms with a tape measure they brought with them. They weren't just casually looking at the house, they were planning how to use it as their own home. At one point, Veronica was pointing to different rooms while her parents nodded along, clearly discussing furniture placement and room assignments. Her dad spent like 15 minutes in the garage, probably figuring out storage for his tools and lawn equipment. The whole thing lasted over an hour, and they were clearly treating it like a house they were about to move into, not a property they were hoping to maybe receive someday as a generous gift. But it gets so much worse. I called the property management company I use for tenant relations and maintenance issues, and asked Linda, the office manager, if anyone had been asking questions about the Oak Street property lately. Actually, yes, she said. A young woman called last week asking about getting a current market appraisal done. Said she was the owner's fiancée and you'd asked her to handle it for insurance purposes. My stomach completely dropped. Did she give you a name? Veronica something. She seemed to know specific details about the property layout and rental history, so I didn't think anything of it. Was I not supposed to help her? Veronica had gotten my rental property appraised behind my back. She'd impersonated my authority to get confidential financial information about an asset I owned, without my knowledge or permission. Linda, I never asked her to do that. Please don't provide any information about my properties to anyone without checking with me directly first. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Royce. Should I not have authorized the appraisal? It's fine, just send me a copy of the report when you get it. The appraisal came back at $248,000, which was actually higher than I'd estimated. So now Veronica knew exactly what she was demanding from me. Not just a house, but specifically a $248,000 asset that was worth more than most people earn in 5 years. That evening, I was still processing all this when my phone buzzed with a text from Veronica. Talk to my parents today. They're so excited about the possibility of finally having their own home. Dad's already planning his workshop space in the garage. She was using her parents' emotions as leverage, making it harder for me to say no without disappointing people who were probably already mentally packing their Phoenix apartment. But then she sent another text that really revealed her true intentions. I mean, it's basically going to be our house anyway once we're married, right? Community property and all that legal stuff. This way, my parents get to enjoy it while they're still young enough to really appreciate having their own place. There it was, the real plan. Veronica thought that marrying me would automatically give her legal claim to my assets. She was planning to get control of that house whether I agreed to gift it or not. The wedding gift angle was just her way of getting it transferred before I realized what community property laws actually meant in Illinois. Except she was completely wrong about the law. I double-checked with Cameron. Property owned before marriage stays separate unless it gets commingled or jointly titled. My rental house would remain mine even after we got married, as long as I didn't add her name to the deed. But Veronica didn't know that. She thought she was being clever, getting me to voluntarily hand over something she assumed would become partially hers anyway through marriage. That night, I made my final decision. By Sunday evening, I'd quietly canceled about 85% of our wedding arrangements. The only people who knew were the vendors, and I'd asked them all to keep it confidential until I could speak with my fiancé directly. Monday morning, Veronica called for her weekly check-in, her voice bright and optimistic. So, what's your decision about the house? I've made up my mind, I said, cutting straight to the point. The wedding's off. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could literally hear Veronica breathing while her brain tried to process what I just said. What do you mean the wedding's off? She finally asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I'm not marrying you. We're done. What followed wasn't a real conversation. It was just Veronica frantically trying to reverse engineer a future I no longer wanted. She hit every stage of denial like a checklist. First, she said I was just stressed, that the house situation had gotten in my head. Then she offered to forget the whole thing, her parents, the appraisal, everything. Said we could start fresh, just the two of us. She didn't understand that the damage wasn't just done, it was revealed. When that didn't work, she completely lost it. Full meltdown, screaming about how ungrateful I was, how I'd never find anyone who loved me like she did, how this was all a massive overreaction. I let her rant for a few minutes. Then finally I spoke. You don't love me, Veronica. You love what I can provide for you, and you got caught planning how to spend it before it was even yours. The fake tears started when she realized I wasn't budging. She apologized. Well, she used the word sorry, but only after being completely cornered, not because she actually meant it. I thought we were building something real together, she said through the manufactured crying. 3 years down the drain just like that. No, I told her. 3 years showed me exactly who you really are when you think you're above consequences. I told her to come pick up whatever belongings she had at my place before the end of the week, and after that, I didn't want to hear from her again. Then I hung up. Within an hour, my phone was exploding with calls and texts from Veronica, her parents, her sister, even some of her friends. I ignored all of them and focused on damage control with the people who actually mattered to me. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that Veronica had moved back in with her parents in Phoenix, still living in that same rental apartment, still complaining about not being able to afford to buy a house. Meanwhile, my rental property is still generating $2,200 a month. My business is thriving better than ever, and I don't have to worry about someone trying to manipulate me into giving away my life's work.
What would you do in this situation? Let us know in the comments. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping family drama, shocking betrayals, and the revenge stories you won't believe.